Hi, good morning. My name is Iliana, and I am a senior majoring in religious studies and music, and I was asked to come in today to talk a little bit about Passover, which is the Jewish holiday that began on Monday and continues on for 8 days. Passover is the time of year where Jewish communities all over the world get together and retell the biblical story of the Exodus. The Passover Seder, which is the traditional meal that takes place on the sometimes first 2 nights of the holiday, incorporates all sorts of ritual and symbolic items and actions for the participants. And what that does is that changes the language of the storytelling from when the Israelites were slaves to when I was a slave in the land of Egypt, when I was brought out of the land of Egypt. And I really love Passover. Actually, it's my favorite holiday because it reinforces this idea that the stories we tell are foundational to how we experience reality, like as human beings. So I thought that maybe instead of going into detail about like Passover and what it is, I would, in the spirit of Passover and in light of my upcoming graduation, tell you my story. Specifically how it pertains to my education. Is that cool? Cool. So the way I see it, the story actually begins in the 5th grade with a math test. I was in a joint 4th and 5th grade classroom, so when we were taking the test, the 4th graders went across the hall to the gym. And then in the last couple minutes allotted, my teacher went to go wrangle them. And as she was leaving the room, I turned to the last question and I skimmed it, and I quickly realized that I had no idea what it was asking. Like, I didn't even know where I would begin, and I got so angry. I was like, we never learned this, la, la, la. But my teacher wasn't there to complain to, so I turned to the girl next to me, and I was like, hey, did you understand the last question? And that was really what I was asking. I wanted like a yes or no answer to gauge. And she was very generous and gave me her paper and said, not really, but this is what I did. And I was like, sweet. And so hearing our conversation, a boy across the table looked over and was like, actually, that's close, but this is the right answer. I did this with my tutor. I don't really know why, though. And then another student joined in and was like, yeah, he's right. And like, this is how you prove it. And all of a sudden, in what I understood as this like beautiful melding of the minds, these 4 students were able to come up with the right answer to the hardest question on the test. And so the rest of the day, like, I was feeling good. Everything was normal. I went home. I had to go to bed early that night, and so I get in bed and I'm like actively trying to get myself to fall asleep. And just as I'm drifting away, it hits me like a ton of bricks. I cheated. And like, this was more than my 10-year-old body could handle. Let me tell you, I was like shaking and crying, and I was like, oh my God, I just have to tell someone. And the guilt was only magnified by the fact that I was going to bed early, to wake up early for the next day's PS 195 Student of the Month ceremony, where I was being honored as such. And I was like, so beside myself. So I was like, okay, Iliana, I have to tell someone. So I go into the living room and I tell my mom what happened. And she decides that it's appropriate that the next day I confess to my teacher after the ceremony. I didn't think that was appropriate, really. I was not for this solution, but at the ripe old age of 10, I knew how far arguing with my mother got me. Not very far. So the next day I woke up and I said something to myself. I remember for the first time that I've said to myself almost every day since. I looked in the mirror and I was like, okay, Brodsky. I always refer to myself as Brodsky in my head. Super weird. I was like, okay, Brodsky, it's time to put on your big girl pants. And that's what I did, right? I got up and I pulled my favorite brown corduroys over my best Wednesday underwear, and I went to that library and I accepted my award like a big girl. And after, I pulled my teacher aside and I told her what I had done. And she thanked me for my honesty, and she did that thing that we tell adults to do with children. She showed her disappointment in me by telling me, she was like, Iliana, I don't get it. You're too smart to cheat. You're too good to cheat. And while I maybe understand that now, I was like, what? At the time, because I wasn't too smart to cheat. I didn't know the answer to the test. I was like, there was no way I would have gotten it on my own. And I didn't think I was too good to cheat because I didn't even know I cheated for like most of the day. I was so oblivious. And it was then that I started to internalize this idea that if I couldn't do things the way they were being asked of me, that I was bad and stupid. And that was really hard for me to come to because school was really difficult for me. Like, it took so much effort for me to achieve success in a classroom environment in a way that I noticed wasn't happening with my peers. And so I continued to cheat in school. I thought that this is what people like me did. I stopped telling on myself for a couple of reasons. The first is where I'm from, there's like, you have the commandments, the first of which is, I'm the Lord your God, the second of which is snitches get stitches. And this was like a safety thing. But I stopped telling because I didn't want people to know what I knew about me. I didn't want people to know that I was stupid and that I was a bad person. And it kept going like that. In 7th grade, I was tested for learning disabilities, which to literally nobody's surprise showed that I had major discrepancies in the way that I process and organize information. And I remember when my mom got the results, she was like really relieved. She was really happy because now we had a starting point, right? We had support, we had tools, we had the language. She could tell people what was up with me. I was horrified though. This was like the worst thing that could happen because that piece of paper was proof that I was forever going to have to do things differently. And that it didn't matter what my IQ was or the things that my brain could do really well, because those weren't the things that were going to help me do what was being asked of me in the way it was being asked of me in school. And I wound up like falling deeper into this sense of like moral deficiency and inadequacy. And the worst part was that now everyone was going to know. Right? I lost the anonymity of cheating. In high school, I went to art school, so we were all like a little bit off. And there was, it's true, there was a lot of alternative test-taking strategies going on in my high school. And so it was almost normalized, and I got really good at cheating. I would do all sorts of crazy things, like for vocabulary tests, I would wear opaque tights to school and have had written the answers on my thigh, and then I'd sit down for the tests and I would rip my tights and have the answers right there, and then when the teacher would come around, I just cross my legs. Or like all the kids with extra time would just sit in the library during exams, and on a big exam days, there weren't enough like seats for all of us, so they would crunch us all at one table and just make sure that we all had different tests, but we knew that we all also had different skill sets. So we would just write our names on the top and pass the tests around depending on who wanted to take what. It's really hard to confess this to a room full of education professionals. Kids are really, really crafty. But the moral of the story is I was really hesitant still to use my testing accommodations because I was so afraid of losing the anonymity. I just couldn't come to terms with it. And when it became time to figure out what was going to happen next with me after high school, I decided not to go straight to college for many reasons. But a large part of it was that I didn't really believe that college was for people like me. Like, people like me could be successful in a college environment. And this was proven to me, like, right in front of my eyes. I have a sister who's 8 years older than me who struggles with the same learning difficulties, and she dropped out. She couldn't do it. So I didn't really know what to do. And so I went to Israel, which is what every nice Jewish girl does when they don't know how to tell their moms they're not going to college. And in Israel, I signed up to learn at this place called the Conservative Yeshiva, which offers traditional Jewish learning in an egalitarian or progressive setting. Just for context, the other option was to go to Hebrew University and take classes, and I was like, why would I go to college if I'm not going to college? So this was kind of like a default decision. And it was great. On the first day, the head of the yeshiva sat down with us and explained to us how they embrace and endorse this concept that's found in Jewish learning called learning for the sake of learning. And because of that, there wasn't going to be any tests or quizzes or homework. They weren't even going to take attendance. Like, we just had to go and do whatever we could with whatever we could on any level we were at. And while they were saying that there's no right way to do this, what I was hearing and what I really, really needed to hear at the time was that there was no wrong way to do this. There's no wrong way to learn. There's no stupid way to learn. There's no bad way to learn. And immediately everything changed. It's like I took off. Like, all these doors I had been staring at my whole life were like flying open. I was having so much fun, and I was learning and absorbing more information than I did in all 4 years of high school, because I was just doing it the way that I wanted to do it, in the way that made sense for me and my brain. And it was like the most, I can't even describe it. It was the most pure sense of bliss and of liberation and of joy, and it was amazing. And one day I got in an argument with my study partner, who was a lovely 35-year-old lady English teacher from California. She was not thrilled with the antics I told her about high school either. We got in an argument, and at the end of the day, I couldn't really make sense of it still, so I went down to the bookstore to see if I could maybe boost up my side of the argument a little bit, or see what she was talking about. And as I'm like piling books onto my left arm, I get a call from my mom, and I sit down in the corner of the bookstore, and I'm talking to my mom, and we're kind of going through the content that I was working with that day and my issues with it, and the book I was just looking through on top. And my mom is fiercely intelligent. She was like giving me really good feedback and helping me. And at one point, the line went quiet, and I just said, Mom, I'm like really good at this stuff, like really good at this stuff. Mom, I think I'm smart. Sorry. And she just said, I know, Iliana, and I've been trying to tell you that your whole life. But I'm so glad you see it now. I'm so, so glad you see it now. Coming to college felt a lot like walking back into the lion's den. I was confident enough in myself to lean on my accommodations a lot and to stop cheating. But I knew that even still, like under the law of this land, I would not be able to fully express or fully utilize my intelligence in a way that was accredited or in a way that I really desired to. And I also knew that here it was going to take twice the amount of work for me to produce half as much output as my peers. And that was just my reality, and I was right. It's been really hard. Every day has been hard, and every day has been extraordinarily frustrating. But I'm graduating college in a couple weeks. And that's not really something I ever believed I would be able to do. At least not with any sense of pride. And I am so proud of myself. It might be taboo to say, but I am so, so proud of myself. And I hope that at this point you can see how this story, how my story is the story of Passover. It's the story of oppression and of bondage and of slavery, really, and the story of liberation and of joy, and of all the work that's implicated in that, and of all the work that's to come, especially. And that's what makes Passover just so great, I think, right? It reflects on this idea that the continued struggle and oscillation between slavery and freedom is what makes us human. It's part of who we are. And I truly believe, and maybe I've been studying like a little too much mysticism, but I truly believe that in every moment of our lives, we're crossing this line, right? We're crossing over between slavery and freedom, back and forth and back and forth. And when I cross the stage in just a few weeks, I'm committing myself to a life of helping other people realize that they're worth it, that they're worth that struggle, even and especially when it seems like friggin' impossible. And I don't know exactly what that looks like, right? I don't have it all figured out. Please don't ask me what I'm doing post-grad. But I know that it's something I want to do. Sometimes I think it's something that I have to do, but I know that I can do it because I too was once a slave in the land of Egypt. Thank you.